Real magic is not a spectator sport, and if someone tries to persuade you that it is, then they either don't really understand much about magic or they are trying to part you from some money. Hello, and welcome to Grumpy Old Crone with me, Annie, where I am going to be whinging about things that don't matter very much in the pagan and witchcraft communities for about the next half an hour, give or take. So first of all, we're going to dive straight into our very first segment of today, which is, as always, existing whilst witchy. Now, one of those things about existing whilst witchy, and that word still makes me twitch a little bit if it wasn't so damn useful, is that we don't exist in a vacuum. We don't live our lives exclusively in flowing black robes, setting fire to rose petals and chanting hymns to various goddesses while waving our hands about all of the time. And no, that one thing was not a euphemism. We're all just out here living. The common stereotype is wildly unhelpful. Who can afford an isolated cottage on the edge of town? Honestly, I'd love one. I'm sure you would too, but frankly, the state of public transport around here means I would need a car and a very big freezer, and I don't remember any of the storybook witches having a Land Rover and a month's supply of frozen vegetables. And have you seen property prices? Single woman on her own being able to afford the mortgage on a country cottage? I think not. And if we try to rent one, imagine getting a landlord inspection whilst, you're halfway through cursing the son of the local landowner. Embarrassing. And where does one even put a stuffed crocodile in a modern house? There is no storage at all, I tell you. So we're all just out here living life in whatever way we can and fighting against the inner critic who always tells us that we're somehow not good enough. So I was thinking about this today, and it occurred to me that there are some things that we can all take part in, no matter where we are or how we live. Now, I've spoken a lot previously about getting in contact with the land that you live on. Rivers, streams, hills, mountains, valleys, plains, woods, whatever's near you. That's all part of the character that we live on. Character of the land that we live on, rather. And if you're in a city, then, the egregore nature of a city can be super powerful. But sometimes people really struggle to find a way to connect with that if they aren't used to it. So I have been doing some thinking about easy ways to start finding a connection. What I came up with today was folklore. So folklore is going to be a thing for me for a few weeks now, I think. The land is asleep, and as I said last week, trying to get in contact with a sleeping land is a lot like being sent straight to voicemail. So why don't we think about folklore a little before the land wakes up? It's a great witch-centric thing to do and doesn't depend on living in some rural cottagecore dream with, strawberry dresses and baskets and hats with big brims. You can do it with a book, or you can do it with a podcast, or with a film even. So let's have a look at what's around. And I'm going to look at what's around me, for example, because, I'm here. So there are a couple of great creature-based chunks of folklore around me and where I grew up. So I'm in the East Midlands of the UK, right? So just a little bit south and west of the Fens. Now, the Fens are a very, very famous part of England. They were drained in the 17th century, and prior to that, they were a really mysterious area. Deep marshes, hidden bogs, very little dry land for living on, and even less for scratching out a living. The people who lived in the Fens were a people apart, and to a certain extent they still are. Dutch engineers came over and drained the land over the course of many years, each year taking more and more land from the people who were linked to it by history and driving them further and further into desperation. And most interestingly, there was a legend, because of course there was a legend. The Fens were ruled by the Tiddyman, or little man. The draining angered him, and all accidents, illnesses and injuries were caused by him. Now, in order to propitiate him, you needed to give him, and I know a lot of people out there are going to go, oh yeah, milk, yeah, honey. No, this is the Tiddyman. He was angry because his water was being taken away. So in order to propitiate him, you give him water, right? Makes sense. So from the early 1600s to the early 1900s, locals poured water onto the land and begged for his goodwill. Now, I'm going to say that last date again. The early 1900s. Now that is entirely within my parents' lifetime. I am just one very short generation away from making an offering to the fair folk to ward off very serious things, being a thing that happened across the entire region. Everybody, it wasn't a case of do I believe it? It's they knew it. They knew it. This worked for them, and so they did it. Now, when you look a little bit closer to where I was born, which is, by my accent, in the southeast of England, you find the altogether fabulous and different legend of Black Shuck, a vast black dog with red eyes, which are always described as being as big as saucers. That description is almost unchanged across all the stories, but it's often seen as a devil dog or an omen of extreme bad luck. The name Shuck comes from the Old English for devil or demon. If you pronounce how it's written, you'd try and pronounce it Skucker. But in Old English, the S and the C make a sh sound. And the U is like the U in put, so it's a shook. So if you go into the village church, for example, in Bungay in Suffolk, you'll see damage to the door caused by the materialisation of this mysterious dog. Basically, the church door in Bungay has there's a whole legend associated with it. Do look it up, the Black Dog of Bungay. But there's burn marks all over this church door, and those are reportedly the fault of the Black Shuck appearing. So I've always been fascinated because the large black dog with red coloration in certain areas sounds a lot like Gwyn ap Nuth's red-eared dogs, which had similar levels of portent and concern attached to their appearance. If you don't know who Gwyn ap Nuth is, Nuth. My vowels are getting a little rude. But if you don't know who he is, the king of Annwn, the Celtic underworld, had big black dogs, red ears. But the thing I find most fascinating about Black Shuck, it is without doubt the fact that the last sighting of Black Shuck was about 8 miles from where I am sitting at this exact minute. 8 miles, and it was 2 years ago. 2 years ago. I mean, we're not talking, back when people were credulous and they believed things and blah, 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 blah. No. 2 years ago, 8 miles away from me. That's amazing. The early 20th century folklorist who worked around this area called Ethel Rudkin collected stories and sightings of Black Shuck and placed them within Lincolnshire. And they're also sometimes tied to the story of the Wild Hunt, which can again be linked to several prominent folkloric figures, Herne the Hunter and Hereward the Wake for starters, Arthur as well. And when you know these stories and you go out to walk in the land where they were collected, it's difficult to ignore them. You look more closely at the land and you appreciate its possibilities, and that is where you start to build a connection with the land. Have a dig around, see if you can find any local folklore. A quick Google tells me that Black Shuck 100% has been seen in various places in the US, which I find interesting as it hints at a connection between people, land and folklore all at the same time. While you can write off a few cases and sightings as imagination gone wild or too much to drink, there are so many now that I don't think we can write them all off, particularly not the ones like the most recent one I mentioned two years ago. The person having the experience said, I don't know what it was. It can't have been Black Shuck, can it? But what else can it possibly have been? I just can't think of another answer. Now, many, many years ago, I was driving to a gig in a distant part of Kent through a heavily forested area called Trosley Country Park, and an animal crossed in front of my car. Now, the person that I was driving with said nothing until I said, maybe 15, 20 seconds after the animal had finished crossing, I said, was that like a huge, huge cat? Now, we were going really slowly, maybe 10 or 15 miles an hour. They were tiny, tiny little roads. The animal crossed directly in front of us, no more than 10 feet from the car. Now, dear viewers, this animal, it was a cat. It was a huge cat. But there are no big cats in England, and this thing was the size of a very large, very muscular Labrador. My companion saw it too. We spoke to the park wardens when we arrived at our venue, and they told us that there were scratching marks like a cat would make, like on a chair leg or a sofa arm, but they were on trees at shoulder height to a human. They had no explanation. I have no explanation. I don't want there to be an explanation for big cats, Black Shuck or the Tiddymon. I love the mystery. It makes me feel connected to the numinous, to the half-seen, to the half-believed, and I kind of love that. Right, shall we leave Black Shuck behind us and shall we move on to the meat and 2 potatoes of today? Now, when I started this channel, I did one of those introduction videos that YouTube tells you it's really important to give new viewers an insight into what you're doing and why. Now, I just looked at mine again for the first time since I started the channel, and oh boy, I apparently filmed it on a potato. I had very little idea what I wanted to say, and I lit it with one overhead bulb in my study here in the main light fitting. Oh dear, what a lot I've learned since March the 12th, 2024. But one of the things I definitely remember saying was about the fact that I really hated the fact that people who acted like they were witchcraft authorities over on Instagram and TikTok were, in fact, about 12. I mean, they weren't, obviously, some of them were at least 15. And I'm not at all biased by the fact that I am apparently older than Methuselah, according to them. Nope. No, definitely not. Definitely not. No, maybe. Now, I don't have a problem with younger practitioners. I was one myself. I try not to judge people on age, but as you will have cunningly already noticed, I often fail. However, I must say that some of the finest educators on YouTube are considerably younger than I am, and they are utterly brilliant. If you haven't checked out Hearthwitch, for example, I recommend her unreservedly. Our practices, very different. Her content, very thought-provoking, educational, excellently researched. She's fab. Now, long-form creators are not necessarily where I'm going with this, but I'll cut to the chase and I'll tell you my issue, and we will go from there. So I have seen a few posts recently, both here on my channel and on some of the other channels and accounts that I follow, from people who all seem to be saying the same thing. And that is, they'd love to be a witch and or a pagan. They feel very called to it, but they feel they're too old to start now. Too old to start now. I have opinions. You're not surprised, really, are you? You're not surprised, but I do have opinions. Now, there's a wonderful saying about trees that I feel is kind of very pertinent to this viewpoint, and it goes like this. The best time to plant a tree was 50 years ago. Failing that, it's today. And that's how I feel about the craft. I'm glad I started when I was a teenager, and I bitterly regret all of those years I wasted trying to be a Christian. I mean, spoiler, I was a terrible Christian. I don't think Jesus lost any sleep over it, though. It's okay. But I'm really very glad indeed for the weird set of circumstances that allowed me to come back to my spiritual home and practice openly again. So yes, it's brilliant to be the sort of person who finds their faith as a young person and then stays on that same straight path for the next 60 years, never doubting, never wandering. I've always thought that that would be wonderful, but faith has never been like that for me. But you know what? We don't stay the same person throughout our lives, do we? We don't think the same things at 70 that we did at 17. We gain experience. We live through personal storms. We have kids, jobs, mortgages, pets. We fall in love and out of love and experience heartbreak and bereavement and grief. And it's all a lot, isn't it? It changes us fundamentally. And it changes how we connect to our faith, our practice, and everything else, really, I think. I certainly look back on the person I was when I came into witchcraft and paganism in my teens. I was so naive. Many people in my life now will tell you that I'm still quite naive. I honestly expect people to treat me the same way I treat them, and I'm not interested in changing that, no matter how often I get let down. Certain things in my life changed me completely, and despite the pain that caused those changes, deep down, I am actually very grateful for them. I think I like 55-year-old me more than I liked 15-year-old me, but I'm also wise enough now to realise that I'm not done changing. I will, in fact, never be done changing. I will continue to change until the day I die, and then I'll decompose, which is, I suppose, another form of change. So, yeah, even then, many of these things change here. I'll get more wrinkles, I'll get more liver spots, I'll forget what I came upstairs for. Who am I kidding? I already forget what I came upstairs for, but I'll almost certainly get more cats, I'll get more chickens, but at no point between now and then will I stop being capable of new things or of new thoughts, of new habits and practices and adventures. If anything, this will all become more possible and more embraceable. I'll have less caring responsibilities, less financial responsibilities, and more time to have, just like little adventures. So what age is too old to start in witchcraft and paganism? To put it quite simply, there isn't one. In the same way that it's never too young to start teaching your child about the beauty of paganism with some simple resources. It's never too late either. We're all on this journey of unpredictable joy together. Some of us get more or less time than others, but what that should teach us is that tomorrow isn't promised. Spend today doing things that matter to you. And if you are called to magic and witchcraft, then by Iden's golden apples, do it. The only question that you should ask yourself is, will this make me happy? And if the answer is yes, then you should absolutely do it. Buy a book, go wild in a witchcraft supply shop, set up an altar, join OBOD, that's the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. It's on my list of things to do when I retire. Do whatever you feel called to do, and know with absolute certainty that it is not too late. You are not somehow less for having spent a chunk of your life doing something that wasn't witchcraft. It simply wasn't the right time for you then, but it might be the ideal bloody time for you now. You've got time, you've got brain space, you've got a weirdly large collection of interesting rocks and salvaged glass jars. This is your time! It doesn't matter if you're 60 or 80 or 100. If you feel called, then this is the time to start. When I started learning harp, I remember a message from a harp teacher that I spoke with occasionally, and she told me that she'd just taken on a new student, and the student was 96. 96! I mean, they didn't expect to be a concert harpist accepting philharmonic requests, but they knew that they wanted to do something that called to them before it was too late. That 96-year-old student has lived rent-free in my head for many, many years. I don't know how far their journey took them, but I do know that they love their lessons and their practice and getting to experience something that they found profoundly wonderful. And honestly, isn't that exactly what we should be getting from our paganism and our craft? Connection, wonder, enjoyment, delight, power. All of that is within reach of us all as practitioners, no matter how old we are. If you are being called for the first time as an 80-year-old, then maybe, just maybe, there's a reason for that. Maybe Freya didn't have a use for a 25-year-old you, but is screaming your name in roll call now that you have the life experience she can use through you. We come to the gateway into our magical practice at different times. For some of us, we walk through it in several directions and several times throughout our lives. The garden is always there waiting for us, but maybe there's something we need to complete on the outside before we venture back in. Now, I always wonder why we doubt ourselves and use the lens of our age to view our abilities to do new things. And after a lot of pondering, I'm pretty sure that at the moment it's the fault of social media. It's those incredibly young, thin, beautiful women out there doing their gorgeously photographed witch talk spell work and telling anyone who will listen that this is the real way to do it. I don't want to stop them doing that stuff because it is, after all, really attractive. And if, wafting a chrysanthemum-scented incense stick around your head brings you joy, then who am I to tell you to stop? Don't, carry on, it's fine. But when did we start redefining what witchcraft is about so that it became only about these people? Now, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Witchcraft is the last hope of oppressed and hopeless people. Enslaved people living in the most desperate and hopeless situations that we can barely even begin to understand found ways to combine their faith, methods of worship and magic into practices that are still hugely powerful today. Villagers who lived in England after the thieving bastard enclosure laws stole their land and very ability to feed themselves and their families both practiced and feared witchcraft. Time and time again, we see hopeless people turn to witchcraft for hope. So when we look at young, affluent white women burning vast amounts of spell ingredients on a daily basis in a perfectly set-dressed environments and filmed on expensive cameras, are we witnessing genuine desperation magic, or are we watching performative staged bits of theatre which are aimed like arrows at our feelings of not being good enough, or not being mysterious enough, or being too old or too fat, or the wrong ethnicity or the wrong gender, or just not owning enough cast iron cauldrons? I think you can guess what I probably think. Social media highlights these perfectly curated yet weirdly meaningless moments of visually attractive spell work. People stare at it for 15 seconds, think, that's pretty, and stick a like on it. Boop, boop. Job's a good one. Only it's not. Nobody has learned anything from this curated piece of visual art. And make no mistake, that's what it is, because real magic is so tedious to watch. It's vast amounts of internal thinking, meditating, transmitting, connecting, grounding, and diffusing. And nothing you say will ever convince me that watching another person meditating and hitting a singing bowl for 30 minutes with no break is fascinating. It's just not. It's brilliant in my head because I can feel the power. I have the choice to hit the bowl or circle the bowl with a beater, feel the difference in energy on any given night, but it's just not exciting to watch. Can you imagine the viewing figures for 30 minutes of me just breathing and looking at a candle? I don't think it would be a breakaway pop hit, let's just say. Real magic is not a spectator sport, and if someone tries to persuade you that it is, then they either don't really understand much about magic or they're trying to part you from some money. Well, actually, now that I think about it, it's entirely possible that it's both. There's nothing essentially wrong really, with being a 20-year-old, thin, attractive, well made up, beautifully dressed, affluent white woman setting fire to lavender in her filming studio. But it certainly isn't necessary to be any of those things in order to be a valid pagan or witch. And if you think it is, then I recommend you go and read a biography of Marie Laveau before commenting. So if you are wondering if it's too late to start walking the path of the witch, then let me tell you unequivocally and without fudging around the subject, no. No, it is not too late, and quite the opposite, my dear cronies. It is absolutely the perfect time to start walking this path. The world needs people prepared to work with community, kindness, knowledge and power. The world needs you. It also doesn't matter if you don't know which path is right for you as you start out. Pick something you're interested in and pursue it. It might turn out to be crucial to your path, or it might turn out to be something that really and completely does not work for you. We've all been there. But everything you learn, whether you use it or not, will make you a better witch in the end, because a little bit of knowledge slowly grows into a lot of knowledge. And knowing how things interact, even if you don't use them, can be really vital. Now, I spent a chunk of yesterday making a list of creators and resources that I believe to be useful and truthful and helpful in building a working practice. It's over on my Patreon if you'd like to check it out. One of the best depictions of an older witch that I've ever seen was in Phil Rickman's Merrily Watkins books, which I've spoken about before and discovered a few other crony Rickman fans along the way. The character's name was Athena White, and she was an elderly practicing witch who had moved into a residential care home to give her more time to read and practice. Now, I don't want to be hugely specific, as it's been a very long time since I read the books with her in, and I'm worried I'll misremember, but she's just the most fascinating character. Powerful, mysterious, weirdly likeable despite her role as an antagonist at points in some parts of the ongoing story. And she's very definitely a little old lady, but one filled with power that is just growing more and more as she has little else to do with her time but research in her huge library of books and try out different practice methods, some of them involving some of her fellow residents. Honestly, I know she's meant to be like a really dubious character, but talk about life goals. I'm there, Athena. I'm totally 100% there. So, to try and pull all of that waffle together, I'll just leave the segment with this. No, you are not too old to start. No, you are not too young to start. No, it doesn't matter what you look like or what you earn or what other people think. This is a path of self-discovery, and the perfect time to start is right now. If you'd like some trustworthy resources, as I say, bob over to Patreon. There's a curated list of people and places that I really like. Right. Get into your chair dancing positions, because it is time for the positive bit! Here comes the positive bit! Well, I had a splendid weekend away last weekend with lots of friends, caught some great music, had lovely chats, ate some fish and chips that were frankly so large as to be absurd, and generally unwound a lot, which was exactly what I needed. I always expect myself to work the same in winter as I do in the summer, and it's always a bit of a surprise when I end up realising how much tension and time stress I've put myself under. It's not really possible. Whilst we are super advanced in so many ways, we are still basically just apes with anxiety. So I think we should genuinely expect less of ourselves when everything's cold and wet and grey. So I'm making a real effort to be kind to myself and at least a few other people this week, and to actively cultivate some positivity. So here are some things to feel good about today. Not necessarily pagan oriented, but we all of us need to feel good and build up some mental resilience, I feel. So, number one, I figured out the shipping blip that charged everybody post and packing fees on their hoodie and mug orders. I haven't had a stray shipping charge all week. Go me. Also, if you've ordered a physical parcel from me, i.e. not US hoodies or mugs but everything else, keep your eye out for a little thank you note. They were designed exclusively by my daughter, the wonderful Mossiest Ghost, over on Instagram. I really love them. So, two. In a less self-absorbed line of thinking, today I made my second donation to the American Civil Liberties Union on behalf of everyone in the US who's bought a hoodie or a mug. It feels good to be doing this, and particularly wonderful doing it and knowing that you all had a little hand in it. I may have rounded up the figure a little bit, so everyone in the UK and Australia can know that they helped a little bit too. We helped people today, cronies. Go us! And I have also made an effort to go and find some nice news, as well as remembering something wonderful that somebody told me a little while back. So, 3. A little while ago, I had one of those health checkups that aren't very pleasant but very necessary if you happen to have been issued with a uterus at birth. Long story short, good job I went. Further medical procedures were needed. The follow-up appointment was not the most enjoyable hour I've ever spent in a healthcare facility, but I was super grateful to be living in a world where science has advanced to the point where I don't have to have a hysterectomy in my 50s, like many in similar situations in previous generations. Also, I'll never look at a cheese wire the same way again. But, unpleasant cheese wire experiences notwithstanding, I had a fascinating conversation with my consultant, so I put myself to rights and got my socks back on. She told me that by the time my daughter, who's currently 22, reached the same age as I am now, it was entirely possible that all forms of cervical cancer would be eradicated. One vaccination would ensure that every generation going forward would not have to face one form of this horrible disease. They've already nixed about a quarter of the viruses that leave us open to it and are well underway to getting the rest into the bin as well. How cool is that? Science! Woo! 4. The fab thing that I found out today, completely coincidentally, was that the murder rate in England has dropped to its lowest ever rate since 1977. Our population has gone up by 21%, but violent crime has actually gone down. And while sexual crime appears to have gone up by 1 or 2 percentage points, it actually reflects the fact that we now believe women and we categorise their experiences as crimes now, rather than just, like brushing it all under the carpet, as used to be so common in previous generations. That is a win, if you ask me. Whatever the press wants to tell us about lawlessness and crime, the stark fact is it's actually safer now than it has been in over a generation, and I really, really love that. I've long held the opinion that bad and terrifying news is given more airtime because the powers that be want us to be scared. A scared population is a controllable population. And if we wake up and say, actually, my neighbours are very nice people and I'm very unlikely to be murdered, so screw it, I'm going to be happy today, that, my friends, is an act of outright rebellion. Taking joy in things is an act of rebellion against those who would prefer you to be terrified and depressed. Screw that! And in case you are worried that this is all UK news and nothing positive is happening in the US, I also just read that 5, some offshore wind farms which were halted by Trump took him to court and they won. His weird antagonism towards sustainable energy has been halted and green wind power will continue to be developed on 3 offshore sites that the Trump administration targeted and wanted stopped. And that is a resounding to the US dictatorship, I think. I bet he's really angry about that. Let's all just take a minute to imagine his anger. Lovely. Oh, those little hands drumming. Probably pooed himself. Anyway, sorry, on we go. And with all of those lovely positive bits of information in hand, I'm going to head into this weekend with the sole intention of just catching up on channel things and then relaxing. I'm going to a craft fair. I will keep my eyes out for 3D wobbly dragons, I promise. And I'm going to have a weekend of making things whilst watching wonderfully trashy TV and drinking cups of tea. I will light incense and candles, eat things that make me happy, cream eggs, and embrace some quiet time, which brings me to today's blessing. Whilst we may not be physically equipped for a full-on hibernation, I think we can hibernate our emotions a little bit at this time of year. Look for the things that bring you joy and remember that joy is an act of rebellion. Whilst I'm grateful for every single person braving the cold and violence and racism in evidence in North America right now, I understand that not everyone is able to fight, or even in a place where there is a physical fight to be joined, but everyone is capable of not allowing the current crop of appallingly self-interested politicians and their media shills around the globe to make them terrified and depressed. The world is not as scary as we are being told. It is full of wonderful, kind, loving people. Sure, there are some deeply unpleasant people out there, but I genuinely believe that those people are hugely outweighed by the nice ones. May you find a way to be completely, carelessly happy this week. I wish you a belly laugh that makes your face ache a little bit because it goes on so long, because those laughs and smiles are the engine of change. Happiness is the enemy of the oligarchy that would suppress us to fuel their own greed. Because when you are happy, especially when you are laughing, you don't feel fear the same way. So smile, my lovely cronies, and stand a little straighter. May there be less weight on your shoulders and more lightness in your heart. Blessed be, my lovely cronies.